US President Donald Trump has lashed out at both Israel and Iran, accusing them both of violating a ceasefire he'd announced in the early hours of Tuesday morning. The European controversy continues over whether or not hand luggage should be free in the cabin when travelling by air.
US President Donald Trump has slammed Iran and Israel after both sides were reported to have broken a ceasefire deal. Speaking to reporters before departing for the NATO summit at The Hague, he said he was especially unhappy with Israel for dropping, quote, the biggest load we've seen on Iran shortly after the agreement.
Well, we basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Meanwhile, the United States' most advanced aircraft carrier has left its base in Virginia for a regularly scheduled deployment that could put it near Israel. The US was already planning to deploy the USS Gerald R. Ford when American airplanes bombed Iranian nuclear sites early on Sunday, supporting Israel's goals. The Ford is sailing for the European Theatre of Command with nearly 4,500 American sailors aboard.
A ceasefire in the so-called 12-day war between Iran and Israel was announced by the White House early Tuesday morning. However, there have been ongoing reports of strikes and missiles launched by both sides. Although it's on the verge of collapsing, the ceasefire was called a day after Iran launched missiles targeting the Al Udeid airbase in Qatar, the largest U.S. military base in the region, in retaliation for the U.S. bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear sites on Sunday. President Trump, who brokered the agreement, stated that both sides have violated the ceasefire agreement and expressed his frustration on social media as the fighting resumed despite his efforts. The situation remains unstable at this time. Here in Doha, it's business as usual, with most people returning to work, but with a sense of caution still in the air. The airspace has been reopened and flights to and from Qatar have resumed. For now, citizens and residents of the Gulf state are united with the Qatar government, backing its calls for a return to diplomacy in the Middle East. In a show of resilience, they continue with their daily lives and make plans for the summer months. Laila Humaira, Euronews, Qatar.
At least 25 people were killed after Israeli troops fired at a crowd of Palestinians waiting for aid trucks in central Gaza on Tuesday. The United Nations Rights Office has criticized the Israeli army and said the weaponization of food in the Strip constitutes a war crime. The head of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, also spoke out on Tuesday. They called the aid mechanism a death trap.
The newly created so-called aid mechanism is an abomination that humiliates and degrades desperate people. It is a death trap costing more lives than it saves. Humanitarian principles need to be reinstated.
At least 410 people have been killed at aid distribution sites since the US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation started operating at the end of May. That is according to a report by the United Nations Rights Office. Israeli forces have repeatedly been accused of opening fire at crowds in desperate need of food. Israel's military claims it fired warning shots at people who they consider to have approached its forces in a, quote, suspicious manner. The UN Rights Office called for an urgent and impartial investigation into each of the killings and urged Israel to allow the entry of food and aid into the Strip.
The Japanese military announced that it had conducted a missile test for the first time on the country's own territory. Around 300 soldiers took part in the exercise hosted by the Ground Self-Defense Force's 1st Artillery Brigade. Officials said they fired at an unmanned boat about 40 kilometres from the island of Hokkaido. The test was conducted as Japan accelerates its military build-up to acquire strike-back capabilities as a deterrent to China. Nearby China has increased its number of medium-range ballistic missiles capable of striking US military bases in Japan, according to the Pentagon. North Korea has also carried out missile tests which sent short-range ballistic missiles into the Sea of Japan. Later this year, Japan intends to deploy long-range cruise missiles, including Tomahawks. It's unprecedented. American conservative organizations close to the MAGA movement have been lobbying MEPs. At least that's according to a new report by anti-corruption group Transparency International EU. MEPs, mainly non-aligned or members of the far-right group Europe of Sovereign Nations, are said to have met with conservative organizations such as Republicans for National Renewal and the Heritage Foundation.
Usually those are organizations that are very much stand for quite climate skeptic position, and they lobby for fossil fuel, for example. And of course, also they're very much against the whole tech regulation that the EU has adopted in recent years, such as the European Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act. And one of the sort of the main topics that you can actually see directly into the meetings is issues around free speech. So they say we defend free speech, so we cannot have this regulation.
ADF International, a US-based Christian anti-abortion organization, is also increasingly active in the European Parliament, according to the report. Although abortion is not a European competence and falls to the member states, these organizations are reportedly trying to influence national debates via MEPs.
It's an organization that is sort of ultra-conservative Christian that lobbies for against abortion. And this is also a subject that now appears in the MEP meetings that didn't exist before, because they're now trying to push or to convince MEPs to adopt anti-abortionist stance. And they have, of course, also a much more favorable ground given the results of the last election.
The report identifies around 20 meetings between MEPs and these American conservative organizations. But let's put things into perspective. In total, over 30,000 meetings between MEPs and lobbyists were recorded in 1 year. Of the 20 most active organizations in the European Parliament, 15 represent commercial interests, with a very active presence from the fossil fuel sector. Only 5 represent NGOs. The European controversy continues over whether or not hand luggage should be free in the cabin when travelling by air. The European Parliament's Transport Committee adopted its position on Tuesday. For MEPs, air passengers should have the right to take 2 personal items with them, at no extra charge. To reach a compromise, however, they had to agree on the size of the luggage.
What we found as a solution is to shrink in the size of that hand luggage, because it's more or less with a size of the personal item. But yes, the proposal of the Parliament is to be included in the price of the ticket. You can have your backpack or a lady purse, which is already the case now. You can have a personal item and a small hand luggage, which should be the total amount of 100 centimeters in length, height and depth.
The European Consumers Organization welcomed the vote, which was adopted by a very large majority. The organization believes that this vote is perfectly in line with the Court of Justice ruling that hand luggage of a reasonable size cannot be subject to additional charges. For its part, Airlines for Europe, which represents 17 airlines, believes that MEPs have taken advantage of this vote to add, in a roundabout way, amendments that deprive passengers of their choice and their ability to decide which services they want to pay for. The meaning of the MEPs' vote runs counter to the decision taken earlier this month by the 27 transport ministers. The member states propose that airlines should be able to charge for hand luggage when baggage allowances are clearly displayed. The interinstitutional battle continues.
A large fire with multiple fronts rages uncontrollably in the Greek island of Chios for the 3rd day. So far, over 65,000 acres have been reduced to ashes, according to unofficial estimates, and a total of 444 firefighters are battling the flames. The island has been declared in a state of emergency, and police presence has been strengthened, as officials said the possibility of organised arson is being seriously considered. The evacuations of settlements continues for precautionary reasons, with residents expressing their fear and concern about the fire.
Παιδιά, η κατάσταση δεν είναι καθόλου εύκολη. Χθες είχαμε από το Χαλκιό, σήμερα έχουμε από το Δαφνώνα. Φοβόμαστε, δεν σε πούμε ψέματα. Πήγα, μάζεψα τα σκυλιά μου. Ελπίζουμε να πάνε όλα καλά, παιδιά. Είναι δύσκολα, είναι πολύ δύσκολα.
Smoke emitted by the fires in Chios has had a significant impact on the atmosphere, according to national data. It said the clouds are now moving south towards the Cyclades. "145 people have been reported being assaulted with syringes during this year's Fête de la Musique festival in France, with the targets being mainly young women. Several people have been hospitalized after being stabbed, and 12 suspects have been detained."
C'est un phénomène de grande ampleur, bien plus que les années précédentes. Et notamment, ça a été optimisé par cet appel sur les réseaux sociaux pour piquer des femmes pendant la fête de la musique. Et autre risque sanitaire, le fait aussi de piquer ces femmes, et notamment, surtout si ces seringues sont passées de main en main.
Officials have yet to say if these were cases of needles spiking with date rape drugs, such as Rohypnol or GHB. France's Interior Ministry has said it is taking the incident, quote, very seriously, and that an investigation is ongoing.